World War II fighter planes are much more powerful than you can imagine. This is the time when aviation really became important, and today we are going to talk about this type of planes, particularly about the Yakolev Yak-9. Since I had the honor of flying in one of them a few weeks ago and experiencing its maneuverability doing stunts for myself, get ready to learn about these wonders like never before. All the countries involved in World War II developed combat aircraft to fight for the skies. The truth is that many of these planes were similar. They were made with the cutting-edge technology of the time when most countries had similar technological capabilities. The Yakolev Yak-9 and its various versions was the plane with which the Soviets began to snatch the skies from the Germans. This aircraft was slightly smaller than the British Spitfire and the American P-51. The Spitfire measures 9.99 yards long with a 36.8 feet wingspan, while the Yak-9 is 28 feet long with a 31 feet 11 inches wingspan. Being slightly smaller allowed for improved maneuverability and agility. The Soviet Union introduced it in 1942, and that same year it was already used in combat. In fact, it is said that this fighter was one of the reasons why the Soviets began to have air superiority over German planes. In fact, the Soviets remember it as one of the protagonists in the battles of Stalingrad and Kursk. The Yak-9 had more than 20 variants, so there are many types of designs. This plane generally used a 0.787 for 0.1574 803149 6-inch cannon that fired through the engine shaft, and then it also used two machine guns positioned at the front of the nose. These machine guns fired through the propeller, and for this they used a synchronization system. What it does is fire the bullets at the moment they are not going to hit the propeller. This automated system was invented back in World War I. One of the most curious variants was the Yak-9T, which replaced the 20mm cannon, which fired through the engine shaft with a 37mm cannon. It was designed to destroy tanks, as this ammunition penetrated the armor of a light tank of the time. But it was shown that the recoil of the cannon was too great, and this made it very difficult to hit a moving ground target. That being said, when it hit a vehicle, it destroyed it with a single bullet. Another very curious variant was the Yak-9B, which could act as a bomber, loading the bombs inside the fuselage itself. This allowed them to avoid air exposure and maintain aerodynamics. However, when the plane was fully loaded, its maneuverability was greatly reduced, resulting in limited success. In the dogfights, the Germans usually approached the Soviets head-on, but the incorporation of the T version surprised the Germans, since a bullet from the 37mm cannon split the planes in half, so they had to change tactics. Given what was seen, the Soviets came to make another variant, the Yak-9K, which carried a 45mm cannon. But this cannon's recoil was already excessive. Apparently the first bullet went where it was being aimed, but from there, the recoil made it completely impossible to hit with the following bullets. And to be able to introduce such a heavy cannon, the cabin had to be moved half a meter back to compensate for the weight. The Yak-9 was one of the most iconic Soviet planes of the war. It is known to have even shot down a Messerschmitt 262. Interestingly, these aircraft are still flying, although not many remain in operation today. But in Spain, and more specifically in Barcelona, there is a person who owns a Yak-9. I reached out to him to fly together and have him share the marvels of this aircraft. Clearly, I had to accept. His name is Jeroen, he's Dutch, and currently runs a company to take people flying with the Yak-9. It's called Barcelona Warbird Flights. Watch my reaction when seeing the plane in person. Like all World War II fighters, the Yak-9 has a retractable landing gear that allows it to reduce resistance and be much faster and maneuverable. The curious thing about all this is that the gear moves by pneumatic force. This means that the plane carries a tank with very high pressure air. This air at a certain point is released towards some pistons, and these move by the pressurized air, and in this way the landing gear is deployed. Before each flight, the pressurized air tank inside the plane must be recharged, which is done using a cylinder. To load the air, a cover in the center of the fuselage is opened, where the cylinder is connected. Jesus, exactly. This plane operates entirely on pneumatic force, as it lacks a hydraulic system. The next thing was to check the oil level. This plane originally operated a Klimov engine, but the Yak-9 that remain operational today do not use that engine.
It's an engine, it's an LSNG-12. It's an engine from the United States.
Because the
original engine, the Klimov, was a copy of the Ellison, but not as good.
The original Klimov engine had to be retired after just 2 flights if used at combat power. Quite remarkable, isn't it? 2 flights, and in the best case scenario, it could reach up to a maximum of 25 hours of operation. In fact, it seems during the war. Pilots were instructed to refrain from using maximum engine power to ensure the engine's longevity for more flights. Wouldn't it be practical nowadays to have an engine with a maximum operation time of 25 hours? And taking advantage of the fact that this engine, the Klimov, was a copy of an American one, the Ellison. Well, the current Jacks use the American engine since it measures exactly the same, has the same power. In essence, it is the same. The only thing that changes is the direction of rotation of the propellers, but this has absolutely no effect on the plane. The engine has 12 cylinders with a typical 5 configuration and uses liquid cooling. The air enters through the hole beneath the fuselage. That's where the radiator is located that exchanges heat between the air and the coolant to regulate the temperature. Afterward, the coolant flows to the engine. The back part is like a gate that can be opened or closed to cool more or less. Generally in flight, this gate is almost always closed, but during takeoff it must be opened to the maximum, because these planes had a very serious problem with temperatures before taking off. In fact, inside the cabin in flight, it's incredibly hot, really, very hot, and it's not because of the sun, it's because all the hot air from the engine gets into the cabin. And even though there is air coming in from outside, when the plane is flying, the heat inside the cabin is incredible. I ended up with my shirt wet from the chest from how much I was sweating. In addition, this plane has 2 air intakes in the wing and fuselage fitting that are used for oil cooling. After cooling the oil, the air exits through the 2 bottom fuselage outlets. These planes use parachutes during flight. At this time, ejector seats did not yet exist, so the way pilots could survive if their plane had been damaged was simply to jump with their parachute. The process is, first, to pull down on the red balls that are in the cockpit. This would cause the cockpit to be ejected. Watch out, because this is super interesting for getting out of the plane.
When we have enough height, we can jump, spin, and push.
Mount clear.
Exactly.
Generate.
Generate negative G's and you're going to get out very easily.
Sure.
And when we don't have enough height, you can get out through the wing and then jump.
Jump, I mean, if the plane is at a good height, a negative G maneuver would be performed. And if at this moment you have your seatbelts unbuckled, would you slide out of the plane? If at a low altitude, one must quickly exit through the wing and jump. I won't ask how because I don't want to know, but that's the procedure, to give you an idea of how unlikely it would be to jump with a parachute. If the engine failed, you wouldn't jump, you'd attempt an emergency landing. You'd only jump in a very strange situation. I'll show you the parachute soon, but first, see how difficult it is to move this plane. To remove it and place it in the hangar, we needed assistance because the 2 of us couldn't budget, not even close. It weighs 440.92 pounds. Once we got the plane out, Jeroen showed me how to put on the parachute and explained how to unbuckle the belts in case of an emergency. Then it was time to fly. Planes that have a wheel in the tail apparently are very different to pilots. When rolling down the runway, the pilot's visibility is blocked by the plane's nose, so they must focus on looking at the sides. Also, something I could feel is that when picking up speed to take off, as the plane accelerated, the horizontal stabilizers of the tail began to generate lift due to their angle of attack. That's why first the tail lifts and the plane becomes horizontal. Then, if you keep accelerating, well, the plane can take off. This, which for takeoff is simply something interesting, for landing is a big problem because when landing, if the main gear wheels touch first and then the rear wheel is lowered, the increased angle of attack generates lift, causing the plane to want to take off again. For this reason, the procedure is to touch the runway with the main gear, but keep the tail raised while losing speed, until the speed is low enough to be able to put the rear wheel on the ground and the plane doesn't take off again. I first noticed the plane's impressive climb rate upon takeoff. Look, a Cessna 172 has a climb rate of 700 feet per minute. The Yak 9 has 2,600 feet per minute climb rate. In other words, more or less like a commercial plane at the moment of takeoff. It was at that moment that I realized I was inside a truly powerful machine. Let's see, the Elysian engine has 1,500 horsepower. During takeoff, I tried to see the flaps by looking at the sides, but they were not visible. First of all, I didn't understand anything at all. Then I realized these were World War II planes. They have what are known as split flaps, flaps that only lower on the bottom part of the wing. When using this type of flaps, the same issue occurred. The pilot can't see if the flaps are down or not, just like I couldn't see them. And for that, there's an indicator on the wing, a small stick that when the aircraft has the flaps hidden, the stick protrudes a little. But the moment the flaps come out, this stick protrudes much more. In this way, the pilot can tell at a glance whether or not the flaps are down. It also has an indicator for the landing gear. When the landing gear goes down, this stick goes up. So by looking at the stick, the pilot knows the landing gear is down. Our flight involved departing Sabadell Airport, rapidly climbing and flying towards the Montmeló circuit to soar above it. After that, we went to the sea for a low pass over the beach, then headed to a mountainous area. Enjoy with me. After this, it was time to do stunts and experience the maneuverability firsthand. Jeroen said he planned to boost the engine power during the stunts, so I wouldn't be frightened when I noticed it. He told me that we were going to do a barrel roll, a loop, and a Cuban 8. The loop, for safety reasons, he said we weren't going to finish. The part where the plane starts to lower its nose is preferable not to do, as the speed starts to increase very quickly. And if there was a failure in any of the systems, wouldn't there be time to recover it? And that's why, at the top, when we're inverted and we're going to flip the plane 180 degrees to rejoin. That said, enjoy the GS with me? After this, we returned to land, and I must say that the GS and the loop were quite strong, about 4 positive GS, more or less. Look, my face, it looks like it's stretching. In fact, look at the camera hand too. It was going down, and I remember that when I wanted to raise the other hand, it took quite an effort. But wait, as I'm editing the video now, I just remembered that I felt a tingling in my hands. I think it's because the blood was going to my feet and not to my hands, and that's why, well, the hands were left without blood. In a video on my secondary channel, Jeroen explained how pilots manage to withstand high G-forces. Right now, there are only about 7 Yak 9S flying in the world. And one of them is flying in Barcelona with Jeroen. Thank you very much for watching this video, see you in the next one. Subscribe if you haven't already. By the way, I'm leaving Jandro's YouTube channel in the description. He let me use some videos he recorded of Jak 9.